Almost every major horror film has been remade, every slasher movie from the 70s and 80s, even William Castle movies. It seems lately Hollywood's been focused on remaking everything from the 80s, movies that are already great to begin with. It's pathetic. The whole point of remaking something is to give it a contemporary take, give it something new. For that to happen, it needs some time. It needs to go down in history first. That's why it made sense in the 90s to make a new Dracula and Frankenstein. These stories deserved being retold. No, they aren't as great as the classics, but they're so different from each other that it's acceptable. Here's some classics that I think could actually use a modern-day retelling. These are the kind that you'd think would be done sooner or later, but so far have not. Just to clarify, these movies may or may not have been remade already. The criteria is that it's been a long time since it's been remade by a major studio. That doesn't count independent films or straight to DVD or television. It has to be a worldwide theatrical release. So, let's get down to it. It's Cinemassacre's top 5 horror and monster movies that are due for a big remake. Number 5. The Mummy. It's surprising that it's been so long since there's been a legitimate mummy movie based on the Universal classic. Of course there was the 1999 movie with Brendan Fraser, but that had more elements of action and adventure than horror. I'm talking about a scary mummy that creeps about like a slasher villain. Would it be Imhotep or Karis? I say, how about both? Imhotep would be the one in control, Karis would be carrying out his deeds. But do it without CG. Let's see some gruesome makeup effects. After all, this is a zombie we're talking about. He should be all skeletonized and decaying. I'm all for the scary mummy. Universal is actually remaking The Mummy again, but we'll wait and see what direction it takes. Number 4. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Don't get me wrong, the 1931 and 1941 versions are perfect, but after that, there's been nothing. Sure, there was the Hammer version, but it was mediocre, surprisingly given Hammer's high-quality standards. And of course there's been many TV versions, spin-offs, and spoofs like The Nutty Professor and stuff like that, but there hasn't been a real big theatrical Jekyll and Hyde movie in so long. A good reason to remake it would be to stick closer to the book. The biggest difference that all the movie versions change was that in the book it's not revealed until later that Jekyll and Hyde are the same person. That would be a good way to go about it if a new version ever comes to light. Number 3. White Zombie. Nobody could ever replace Bela Lugosi, but of all the 30s horror films, nobody's ever gotten to this one. There is apparently a recent independent take on it, and a cancelled Tobe Hooper project based on it, but never ever has there been a big studio remake. This is a movie that definitely has its own style. A modern day version would be very different, and that's perfect because the original is like a fairy tale. It's that kind of story that could be retold again and again with entirely different results. Not to mention, with the recent zombie craze, this movie could definitely use an updating. It was the first zombie movie ever made, predating the scary flesh-eating zombies of Night of the Living Dead. White Zombie is public domain, so what's holding them back? While Hollywood's too busy remaking every horror film from the 80s, White Zombie is just staring them in the face. Number 2. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, House of Frankenstein, and House of Dracula. I'm talking generically about the good old-fashioned monster mash from the 40s. Basically, get all the classic Universal monsters and put them in one movie. The most recent great example that I can think of was the Monster Squad. These are timeless characters that could benefit from a big budget and seeing them all together. While the old movies will forever be the definitive example, there are some things they never got quite right. Universal rarely had the monsters interact with one another. The standout highlight is the battle in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Nothing else came close. All the monsters usually appeared separately, and they never included the mummy. There's been some further attempts at bringing classic monsters together that failed miserably, like Dracula vs. Frankenstein. It's so dark, you can't see a damn thing. There's the big-budget Van Helsing in 2004, which looked like one giant video game cutscene, but I still welcomed it in keeping the classic monsters alive. There is an independent film, House of the Wolfman, which did an amazing job at recreating the look of the classics, but unfortunately the monsters don't appear until the last 10 minutes. The good news is that Universal is supposedly planning to reboot all the classic monsters and then start putting them together in the same movies. It's about time! It took Marvel with their superhero movies to wake up all these other studios and realize that this is the kind of thing people want to see. Hopefully, this modern monster mash materializes in the near future. Number 1. King Kong vs. Godzilla. The 1962 version is great and campy and is still to this day the most iconic monster vs. monster movie ever. Universal and Toho teamed up to deliver the goods. Now, all these decades later, if only they would do it again. Unfortunately, the legal bullshit gets a lot more complicated, but supposedly Legendary Pictures now has access to both franchises. Imagine King Kong vs. Godzilla with a big budget. With recent remakes of both monsters, including a Kong prequel called Skull Island coming up, let's hope that opens the doors for this to finally happen.